Alrighty, so this will be day 2 of construction on the cryptid or mythological cardboard mask. In my case, I'll be continuing to work on my big old giant, what will be Loveland Frogman mask. So last session, I was working out the general frame of frog skull here, which I can double over and share. Looking at frogman examples, and then of course jumping over and looking at the other tab of looking at actual frog skulls and such. Because anytime, at least for myself with this one, because it was going to be a larger form that I can then put material over, it would make a lot more sense, at least for me, to build it around an actual frog skull. At least the general shape, figuring out the mouth form, figuring out the spurs for the mouth, figuring out the overall skull shape. And then of course I could build on top of that. Because once I have a skull shape, I can then also mate that to a hat form, however that might take. Because like I said, I wasn't entirely sure if I wanted to have the head more of up like this or much more forward. So that's what I'll be working on today. Yes, it ended up being a lot more flat than I would like, so I'm still going to work on altering that as well. So I have a good amount of work to do today, but at the moment, I think I have a fairly okay idea. So that's what I'm working on. So first what I want to do is, before I figure out really where I want this hat and how this is going to merge together, I really want to continue shaping this skull because this is really where it's going to be. This is really where the main design is going to be. And today, what I want to do is work on figuring out how the back of the mouth frame, this mouth spur, how that connects with the top of the skull. Now, obviously, I'm not trying to make an actual like photo accurate skull. I'm just using the example as just that, an example more of keeping the shape roughly to the same, because obviously I of course also want to take it into account that it's not like the example of the Loveland Frogman is an actual giant frog. It's a story, it's a cryptid, but yeah, obviously it's gonna take some tweaks because I don't know, is it a giant frog? Is it a man frog hybrid? Is it a otherworldly creature? Who knows? But definitely want to have some more large bug eye, frog eye eyeballs for it, and less so much of a flat head, because right now it's really turning into something that looks more like a snake skull still. So what I'll probably end up doing, for one, is I want to add a little bit more fold to this head, both in the back here, but also somewhere in the middle. Now I've put in these struts across here to help keep this angle across, but I also want to try to put a little bit more of a bend here. And the good thing is because I have all of this structure already built in, I can kind of just work around and work to bend this. So what I'm doing is I'm putting my thumbs right there, and I'm just using my 2 spread fingers to bend between there. It's not going to be an exact bend, and I don't need it to be. If anything, it actually kind of helps that it's kind of breaking a little bit. It's not like it's breaking the cardboard, it's just breaking some of the corrugations. But it's going to end up with a little bit more flex there. And what I can do is I can also still move these spurs downward a bit, and that's going to start to become more of what the shape that I want. Something like that. So I'm going to work on just kind of fine-tuning the shape and then figure out exactly where I want to add in support to have it hold that shape. And then I'm going to work on building out from the skull to the spurs. Now, realistically, when I was looking at the example there, I'm probably going to cut this skull shape back a fair amount, because the examples and an actual skull, the mouth spur goes out behind the skull. So to keep this somewhat more manageable sized, I'm going to shrink the top of the skull and allow the back to be a bit longer. And that's what I'm going to go for. So I'm going to tweak that a little bit, and we'll come back. All right, so I made some adjustments to the skull. I added in this support down here. so I could better bend the thing to get a bit more of an actual angle. And I also adjusted the back of the skull just to round it out a little bit, because what I want to do next is create the struts that go between the back of the skull and hold the lip spline or the mouth splines in place. And in showing examples of basically just other frog skulls and such like that, what I'm trying to recreate is this area back here, just so I can have that more appropriate, or let me see if I have a better image. There we are. Just because I know that the back of the skull, where I'm kind of thinking that my head will actually be, will end up putting the actual back of the mouth more of toward the back of my own head. So I'm looking at those examples. And to do that, I need to create this ridge that goes between the center of the skull and out here. What I'm going to do is I'm basically going to make more of this same piece, where it's just corrugated cardboard. Corrugations are parallel, or in line rather, with the length of the material. I'm going to fold it into this V, just folding it in half slightly. But I'm going to create struts in between here for both. So I've got my more material. I have plenty more of that I've already pre-cut. Makes a lot more sense to work that way. And I'm just going to work my way around, folding some pieces and just trying it out, because I'm not certain of exactly how I want it to look yet on this either, but I'm just going to try out some designs. Basically, what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to attach a piece here and bring that over to the back of the skull. Now, the problem with that is I need a better way to connect there. And what I'll end up using are some tabs and just fold them over. Or what I could do, better yet, is I can take the end of this, and instead of adding additional pieces on here, I can put a slit right at the center here and fold these outward. So like I said, anytime you need to make a connection, don't just make a butt joint or so where you're just sticking pieces together. Cut some tabs, and if you spread those out, you've got a much stronger gluing point. Now right there to obviously be in the way, but we have ways of fixing that too. But I want this to be connected over here, and I want it to be a good connection. So what I'll probably end up doing, folding these tabs back the other way and gluing that in place somehow like that. Just so that way I have a good connection point that then I can continue up and into the top of the skull somewhere. Not sure exactly how I'm going to do that yet, so I'm going to try a couple of different designs, hold them in place with some pins, and see where that gets me. Always the best way to try it out is do that, try it out, then figure it out from there. Alrighty, so after some experimenting with the forms, after I adjusted the ridge here, adjusted the back of the skull plate, I was trying to figure out how best to extend that back of the skull, this spur here, and down to the rest of the jawline. So after looking at the examples again, and I will throw that back up just to give myself my example. So after looking at the frog skull and such, and what I'm trying to recreate is obviously back here, I came up with, I think, a solution that will be strong enough to support and also be a bit more fitting to what I want. Because what I do still want is I want to make sure to keep to some degree the frog skull design, but what I wanted was this back to come both down and backwards. So what I ended up doing is I still used that same piece of cardboard that I was using before. I took the length, and I'll just pull that down, folded it in half, just like I've been doing so far. And yes, I did cut a slit in the end to allow me to make some tabs that fold out. But what I did to create this curve here is I used a sheet metal shaping technique, in that if I want to take a folded bar, beam or whatever, and get this to go to then also bend one way or another, well, what you have to do is either compress one leg or stretch it. And well, since obviously paper and cardboard, while they're a good stand-in for metal shaping and such, they're not exact, but what I can do is simulate that by cutting slits. Basically the same way I did this. What I ended up doing is I ended up cutting a bunch of slits about an inch or so apart from one another and folded them and let them overlap just a bit, glued it in place, and did the next, so on and so forth, in just slight increments. So I keep the strength of this L-beam, or rather just this folded piece of cardboard, but it also gives the shape that I want and keeps strength. So what I did, and I'm just going to mirror it, and I just clip these all in place here. You can see it's got that fold. Let me get this come back a bit. It's got this fold coming backwards, and that's what I'm going to recreate. So just to make sure I'm doing it the correct way, I'm going to keep this in front of me as I work. And just trying to get the image into the screen here. Like I said, I cut it in about 1 inch increments. Now make sure that it's on the correct side that you actually want to be working. But roughly, if that's the end of the tab, we'll cut a few slits. And it looks like I did 1, 2, 3, 4. So I made like 4 or 5. You can always just not do the others. But it's important that it goes all the way to the back there. So now what I can do, make sure it goes all the way to that bend. And what I'm going to end up doing is folding this side of the cardboard ever so slightly so that these overlap a little bit. And I'm talking just a very small amount. It's not much at all. Let me trace what I'm doing. You can see that's how much it's overlapping. It's very little. Yeah, just this little amount, that little wedge. It's very little. And it's all going out of focus for some reason. I don't know why it's all going out of focus on me here. There we are. So you see just very little. All right, anyway, it's very little. We got it. Move on, please. All right, so I'm going to do the same, just working my way down. A little bit of glue, overlap, stick it together. Good thing, again, have pins handy so it actually holds what you're doing. A little bit of glue, be cautious, because as these squish out, not to burn the ever-living crap out of yourself. Fold a little bit. It will help rather to pre-fold the cardboard a bit, just to kind of soften the fibers between these folds here. Just be careful. That glue is screaming hot right now. So I'm going to work my way around this. When it's done, I'll show you how I install it. Oops. So this might just show it a little bit more clearly now. Showing the overlaps. Again, pre-folding just a little bit. I'm not trying to make a very large bend. And if it helps, always make sure to match it to the other. So I just went and checked this against the first one I made. And I'm just marking this again just for your benefit so you can see what I'm doing. Very little overlap, but over a distance, it's enough to make a pretty significant curve. And again, I'm maintaining the strength because I need that spot to stay strong. That's going to end up holding a lot of stress. It's going to end up holding a lot of, not weight, but it's very easy to bump into that, flex into that, anything like that. Getting some, again, just oddball autofocus issues. So let that cool, and then I'll install it. Alrighty, so, oops. Now the fun part, I got them pretty well placed. Now I'm trying to just get them to match. That doesn't have to be perfect. It's going to be pretty large. but I'm going to try to get these pieces in the back here to match. And what's going to trip it up back and forth is actually, it's not necessarily where it's connected. Oops, my clothespins are falling off. Not necessarily where it's connected. However, what can really come into play is because this is on two sides, these bends, look what happens when I fold one or unfold one a little bit. It moves these in and out quite a lot. So I'll end up cutting these somewhere short, plenty, of course. But for now, I just wanted to see really where all of this is going to line up and if I can get this to pretty well match, which honestly, it looks pretty good. So what I'll end up doing, and all the more reason for the clothespins, I'll unclip one side, put some glue, clip it back in place. While that cools, or once that cools, do the other side. I'll lock these in as I go. And over here, I'll end up just trimming these after the fact. I'm just not even going to mess with it right now. I'm just going to leave it where it is, glue them in place, and then trim some other parts. And that'll be pretty much the basics for my frog skull. So I'm gonna start gluing this stuff up, and we'll come back to it. All right. Now, one last thing on this before I glue the centers in, because I just glued the edges. Those are still cooling, but I want to make sure that the sides are as far apart as they need to be. And I remember overall, this needed to be about 20 inches wide. So right here, that's measuring to 12. And from there, that's measuring to about 11. So I'm not upset if it's going to be a little bit larger, but in that case, let's shrink that a little bit. So that's all the more reason why I didn't glue these center ones in just yet, so that I can still adjust that as needed. And I'm measuring from the center fold. That's now about 11 and a half. That's now 11 and a half. Yeah, it's roughly about the same. So yeah, I'm going to go with that. I think that works well enough. Again, this whole thing is going to end up getting covered to some degree. So I think that ought to work. The ends are cooling. Now what I'm going to do to make sure that I don't upset this measurement, I'm going to leave one side pinned, and then we're just going to kind of pick up this piece a little bit from the inside. I'm not going to glue it all the way to the center because I'm going to end up trimming some of this, but I'm just going to squirt a little bit of hot glue underneath there. I want that to be more toward the end or to the back. Let that pin. Same here. Again, it's not like this is precision. It doesn't have to be exactly the same measurement. Still about 11 and a half, still about 11 and a half. We're good. Okay. This isn't a precision. This isn't a precision sculpture. It's a giant frogman. Or whatever your creature of choice happens to be. So let those cool a bit more, and then we'll be in a much better spot for this whole thing. Neat. Alrighty. Oops. So I made a few more adjustments. I got the back ends all glued together. Those are all cooled. I can take the pins off. I didn't glue them entirely onto the frame. Also, I wanted a little bit more flex in the overall shape of the front of the skull. So I ended up adding one more strut to the back here, just like I've been doing all along here, that helps the whole thing hold its shape. However, unlike here at the top, where I was able to kind of fold it and it made a little bit more of a crest, back here, it just wanted to fold and flatten because of just how the corrugation already is and how it was this was a pre-existing fold from the box. So what I ended up having to do is cut a slit up the side there, and I'll end up just wrapping a little bit under. I'll fold it a little bit there. It's very little, but it's enough to overlap, just like I did up here at the snout. It's a very small amount, but it's enough to where it otherwise would have just kind of buggered up the whole thing. But that's pretty well the frog skull. Obviously, I'm still going to figure out the jaw, the lower jaw, and I'm going to be figuring out the back and all that, but I have a pretty good idea of how I want to do the back of the head that will come down over the back of my head. And right now I'm looking at it. Yeah, you can't not laugh at this. Just looking from the back, I think what I'm going to end up having to do is I'm going to have the mouth slightly open, so I'll be able to see just a little bit out, but basically it'll be a little bit of a slack-jawed frog because I'm intending to make large bulging eyes. And what I'm planning on doing for that is I'm going to end up making some paper mache eyeballs over a couple of balloons using some tissue paper and then just a glue and water mix. But that's pretty much where I'm at. I've got a good shape going. Obviously, I'll end up filling all this stuff in, and because I was basing all of this off of the frog skull itself. But what I want to do is make the eyeballs first, because I'll end up making the material that goes in between, things like eyelids. And if I do figure out, maybe I'll work in some of the ears where frogs, other amphibians, and a lot of lizards and such, they don't have an ear so much. Some of them have an ear hole. They don't have like actual ears. But what they do have is it's actually legitimately their ear drum out against the side. It's called a tympanic drum or a tympanic ear, like, timpani drum. Hey, biology lesson. Anyway, that's pretty much where I'm at, though. I like the shape of the back of the skull. That looks good. They're even. I gotta fix these little things, but this little gap here is just something to be glued over, or maybe I'll put a patch on the inside so it's a little bit stronger. But yeah, this is all actually pretty stiff now. Because these outriggers are folded, because this is a folded frame, because this back is folded, and all of this, the top of the skull, this plate here, yes, it's folded this way, but it has these support struts going up inside, and this one main one going side to side, helping this whole skull keep its shape a little bit. This is actually pretty strong. Obviously it's cardboard, so it's flexible a little bit, but it's going to hold its shape quite well now. So now I can look at creating where I want to put the placement for the hat, matching up my inner hard hat thing here, figure out where I want to match this up. But I have the ability now, because it's strong enough, I can, if I want to have it up right here where I have it all, or have all bunch of the back of my head, maybe I move it forward where it's sticking way off of my own head, and just around the back is a covering. That I have not yet nailed down, but I have the option to still decide, because I'm building this a bit separately, and I'm going to make these two together once I really finalize that. And I know I keep saying that because I'm still deciding. I haven't chosen yet. So next class, I'm going to do some prep and make the eyeballs and work on. In the meantime, I'm also going to try to build the lower jaw, so at least I have that starting to get figured out and how I'm going to attach that. But basically, I'm just going to make another one of these frames here, and I'll attach it definitely somehow-ish. So until the next time, we'll do the tip of the weird cardboard hat, and we'll see you next time.